Yes, welcome YouTube to another Clear Vision Wednesday episode. I am Claudia Mühlenweg. I'm the creator of the Natural Clear Vision Method. So if you're interested in natural vision improvement, make sure to follow me here on YouTube, subscribe to my channel, click the little bell. We go live every single Wednesday at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, which is 8 p.m. UK and 9 p.m. in Central Europe. So yes, today's episode is all about the brain and the eyes. And we're going to do a little bit of a mini anatomy lesson in the beginning. So it's kind of, if you already know a lot about neuroscience or visual pathways, you can, if you watch this as a replay, you can probably skip this part because you won't learn anything new. But if you haven't really, understood this on a basic level, then this is going to be really interesting. So I will share my screen. I have basically a short slideshow where we go over the brain anatomy, the visual pathways, and then I will show you 5 practices. Some of them I will show on slides, and then some of them I will show after the slideshow because it's just easier to show it in person. And also we have links underneath the YouTube video for the brain gym resources and my Lazy 8 handouts and so on. So, and we might add more resources underneath if we need to, if there's questions about it. So let me share my screen. So while I share my screen, I will not able to see any questions. We will do that after the screen share. All righty, so let's do that. Okay, so 1 second, and then let me hit play. So today's, Clear Vision Wednesday episode is called Beyond the Lens, the brain's role in clear vision. And before we get going, I always want to say that it's, I'm not an eye doctor. I'm not, replacing traditional vision care. Really important that you get your eyes checked at an ophthalmologist's office, especially if you're older. I would recommend doing it annually. And this is all based on my experience and my knowledge and research I did myself. So let's dive right into the anatomy. So some of you might remember this, side view of the eyeball. So we're going to talk just a little bit about the eyeball before we get into the brain. And technically the retina is part of the brain. So really interesting, the fovea, which is that teeny tiny pin-sized head spot in the back of your eyes, that is the brain uses 50% from that focal point for the processing of the visual information. So I think it makes sense. This is where we have our sharpest vision. That's where our attention is going versus the peripheral field, which is another 50%. And I think for some people, especially with glasses, that work on computers, I think the periphery has less than 50%. It's almost completely neglected, which is not healthy. But just remember this part right now, that 1% of the retinal space, in terms of like square inches or whatever that area is the fovea, and that's using 50% of the brain processing. So I think that's pretty amazing. So let's look at the visual pathway, at least at the top here. So when I first learned this, that really, really blew my mind. I was like, how is this possible? So when you look at this graphic, you see the right eye on the right, obviously the left eye on the left. And you notice how, there's a visual field, each eye has a visual field, and then they overlap in the center. And that center is where we have 3D vision, assuming we have 2 eyes. But notice how the right side is kind of that turquoisey greenish color, and the left is the reddish color, right? But look at each eye, how each eye connects, right? So when you look at the nasal retina, it's kind of demonstrated here. When you look at the nasal retina, you see anything that's when you kind of cross your eyes, think of looking at your nose. What the right eye sees is the right visual field, and what the left eye sees is the left visual field, right? Indicated by those colors. But when you look at the temporal retina, like the kind of where the temples are on the outer, the peripheral field, it's actually the other side that you see. So the right eye sees the left visual field, and the left eye sees the right one. To me, that was just mind-blowing when I first learned this. And so the optic chiasm is kind of that crossing point, that intersection where the optic nerve is the little extension from the eyeball. And when they cross, it's the optic chiasm here. So this is the first part of the visual pathway. We're also going to look if you have any blockages in these nerves, what will happen to your visual field. And then as we get to the next slide, let me actually, 1 second, I need to pause this for just a moment. Let me just stop my screen share for a second. I need to do something in my slideshow. 1 second, guys. I have some speaker notes that for some reason were not showing. And I do need them because some of this information I cannot possibly remember at all. So let me share my screen again, and then we're going to continue this. Hold on. Apologize for the delay. Okay, so I'm going to go hit play again. Okay, so this is basically an overview over the whole visual field system. So you have the optic chiasm, right? The pituitary gland is right in front of that. Then you have what's called the optic tract. It's kind of that whole area. Then you have what's called the lateral geniculate nucleus of thalamus. It's a mouthful, and it's usually abbreviated LGN. And then and then you kind of everything, the optic, it's called the, God, I'm blanking right now on the name. You know where those feathers are kind of feathering out toward the bottom, where the back of the brain, that's the visual cortex. And I think my speaker notes are still not showing because I have a little bit more information on this coming. So just quickly, so I just highlighted, this is kind of shifted away a little bit, not sure what happened here. But the one is supposed to be, the little blue dot on the one is supposed to be directly in the center of the optic chiasm, right? Right, exactly. Let's say you have a tumor there, or there's some kind of damage to your optic nerve. That would mean that you don't have, on the right side, you don't have any visual fields on the left outer side and the right. Basically, you have no peripheral vision on the sides. Now, if that loss of vision or optic nerve damage or tumor would be on that, the lateral geniculate nucleus on the right side, you would have peripheral vision on the left, no peripheral vision on the left, and no nasal vision on the right. And if it would be sitting in that area, the visual cortex that area, you would basically have peripheral vision to the right and central vision. So when this was part of my teacher training to really figure, this is brain, your brain is exploding when you try to figure out what happens. But it's so interesting how the brain, really how our vision is really connected to both sides of the brain. So when people say, are you left brain or right brain? And really with our eyes, it doesn't make any sense because both sides of the brain are completely involved in vision. And even if you have just one eye, you can see that it's still connected to both sides of the brain. All right, so, this is the wrong. Here we go. Now we get into the more the nitty gritty. So basically, think of the processing as this. So once the light hits the retina, right? And again, the retina is part of the brain. It's then basically changed into electric signals by the photoreceptors. And those are the rod cells and the cone cells. You already probably know those. And then they travel, through the optic nerve to the back of the brain. And once they hit the optic chiasm, what I said earlier, half the fibers continue to the same size and the other half moving to the opposite side. And this ensures that each hemisphere of the brain processes visual input from both eyes, enabling binocular vision and depth perception. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about that unpronounceable thing, the LGN. So that's basically like a switchboard operator for your vision. So when the light enters through our eyes and it moves down the channel to the lateral geniculate nucleus, basically the signals don't go straight to the visual cortex in the back. So they kind of stop at this LGN area. And that's basically, this area does three different things. It sorts the signals and it organizes them. So think of the post office sorting your mail by zip code, right? Next, it filters for importance or urgency. Like, is this important? Is this urgent what I'm looking at? And then lastly, it sends the visual information to the part of the brain where it gets processed in detail, which is basically the visual cortex, allowing us to understand and interpret of what we are seeing. And here it's important to understand that the feed from the high resolution, what I said earlier, remember, get tiny fovea in the retina is responsible for about 50% of what gets sent forward. So yeah, this is, to me, really interesting, this aspect, that 1%. All right, I know this is a lot you don't have to remember all of this, but just remember that the LGN is basically kind of a pre-sorting system or stopping point of like how important, how urgent is this information before we move it all the way to the visual cortex. And The visual cortex is separated into different layers, and we don't have to get into the nitty gritty of that. But the primary visual cortex, also known as V1, that's located in the occipital lobe at the back of your brain. So if you touch the back of your head, that's basically where the visual cortex is. And that is the first cortical area, right, to receive visual information. So in our neocortex. And the V1, or the primary visual cortex, processes basic visual features such as edges, colors, orientation, and so-called spatial frequencies, which means how often are patterns repeated in space. Now, this is a cool graphic I found on Wikipedia. It's actually an animated GIF. I think I have to click it one more time to play. But basically, this is actually a typo. It should be Brodmann area. Oh, Brodmann is correct. Sorry, Brodmann areas. So I think we have identified like 5 different visual corti areas, but the main ones are the V1 is the yellow one here. The second one is orange and blue. And so what they do, I already talked about the primary visual cortex, like V1. And that is basically what's fascinating about this aspect is that it's basically a mirror mapping between the retinal cells and this cortex. So basically, what's in the center of the retina is also in the center of this visual cortex, and what's on the periphery in the retina is on the periphery of the visual cortex. So it's kind of, to me, that's really fascinating. It's kind of like a mirror mapping. Then the secondary visual areas, which is like, V2, V3, and again, we know a bunch more already. And they basically process more complex features. So like after the first kind of like, okay, we know this is orange, this is round, maybe it's a pumpkin, maybe it's a balloon, we don't know what it is. The V2 cells then respond to more complex patterns and orientations. And V3 is then more tuned into perception of motion. So that is like, is this thing moving? Is it static? So basically each of these secondary areas further break down and process the information. And that helps us to construct our coherent visual experience. So basically, to summarize, the visual cortex transforms the basic electric signals from the eyes into that kind of rich, detailed, wonderful thing we call vision. And it breaks down the visual scenes, analyzes them at multiple levels, reconstructs them, and collaborates with other brain regions to ensure that we perceive, navigate, and interact with our environment effectively. And that's, I always say, in my webinars, the retina doesn't know a table from a chair. And Dr. Bates had a quote basically saying, what we see is not what we actually see, it's what we perceive in the brain, right? And that's why people often so much disagree about what something looks like, because we each kind of interpret this data differently. And, our vision is really based on our past experience, on memories, and all these different things. And that's why, it's kind of pointless to argue about colors, because even if you're not colorblind, we really perceive things individually slightly different. So I think, here we go. See how cool this is. So this is from Wikipedia. I listed the source down there. But yeah, it's pretty cool, these different areas in the visual cortex in the back of the brain. And the last piece of anatomy really here is also really interesting, the so-called visual processing streams. So once it arrives in the visual cortex, right, in the occipital lobe, basically it gets processed into 2 primary pathways. One of them, the one on the top that you see there, is called the dorsal stream. It's kind of a where pathway, right? So that is basically for processing spatial location, motion, guiding our actions in relation to objects. And then the other one, that kind of the lower one, the ventral stream that passes past the temporal lobe, is about kind of object recognition, facial recognition, determining the significance of meaning of objects. In my webinars, I often talk about Dr. Oliver Sacks, the famous, he passed away, but he had prosopagnosia, which was face blindness. So part of his temporal lobe was not working right, so he couldn't recognize faces. Even, I know he wore glasses, but even if he had perfect eyesight, he would not be able to recognize faces. So all these areas, so it's not just the visual cortex, but all these areas are really involved. And to me, it's so fascinating how quick all this happens and how these dorsal streams and the ventral visual stream really help us to navigate the world. And obviously, if you have deficiencies in any of these areas, that's why sometimes it might be hard to, even if you have two functioning eyes, it might still be hard to orient yourself in space, or you get dizzy, or you bump into things, or you don't know, like you can identify objects. So it's, that's why I'm always saying the eyeball is just the beginning of a whole visual system. And most eye doctors only, they only look at the eyeball. They don't really look at the whole rest of the brain, which is really important for all this. So I hope your brain is not hurting by now. We really just did a superficial dive onto the brain of visual pathways, but let's look at some practices that can help you, improve your left-right integration, your focus, visual clarity, and so much more. So basically, here's a few things that I want to share with you. Memory and imagination is really a huge area. And basically, I would say 90% of the Bates method, which is my natural clear vision method is based on, is about using memory and imagination. So even if we do things with the eyes open, there's always an aspect of imagination or a memory of what have you seen. Can you imagine it clearer? So, it's not, mechanical eye exercise, what so many people think. And I will give you one simple way to practice memory and imagination. And obviously, there's thousands more. So that's basically also, what I want to say about this is, to me, fascinating. So several studies, using functional MRIs have shown that when people were asked to imagine specific visual scenes or objects, part of the visual cortex becomes active. The level of detail and specificity of the imagined item can determine the extent and location of this activation. And again, I want to talk about Oliver Sacks. I loved his book, The Mind's Eye. I have like 1,000 bookmarks in that book. And he shared the story of the Australian psychologist Zoltan Torrey, who lost his eyesight in a chemical accident at age 21. And instead of following the typical advice that he got to, like, oh, you should improve your hearing, you should hone your other senses, he feverishly worked on developing or continuing his visual memories and imagination based on the sighted memories that he had, right? He had 21 years of vision. And he also painstakingly always checked if his visual imagination was accurate. And over time, he got so good and so confident that he repaired his own roof, and he was completely blind. The neighbors were shocked, obviously. He wrote a really great book called Out of Darkness, sharing his story and his practices in detail. So it's, we now know from these brain scans that, the visual cortex is totally active, even if we have eyes closed and just imagine something. So the lazy eights, I have a resource below in the notes, and I will show a little picture of them. I can't really show them here and full, but I will show the air ones after this. So basically, lazy eights is like an infinity sign, and they help integrate the left and right visual fields, improve hand-eye coordination, your balance, and they also boost central and peripheral vision, and with movement, basically. And you can also use them working one eye at a time. That can actually often release stuck emotions, because believe it or not, each eye has their own kind of personality. And often when I work with clients, and let's say we occlude like the right eye, suddenly tears are flowing, or something, big from the past can come up. So that's, especially with the lazy eights, they're so cathartic and relaxing, but also really vision boosting. And I've seen many times that people's clarity on the eye chart is much improved after doing them, even though it's not a specific visual acuity exercise, so to speak. So field divider, I call it nose card. It's basically a card that you stick on a frame. I will show that to you in a moment. That will also stimulate the temporal visual field and strengthen your binocular vision. Alternate nostril breathing is something I learned in yoga, and there's a bazillion videos out there how to do it. But basically, you breathe through one nostril at a time. And I like to imagine, and I can show you how you move the breath into your brain. It's kind of an imagination and kind of a lazy eight through your brain and your nose and your breathing. It's really helpful to integrate both of the brain sides, and obviously, improve oxygenation of the brain. And brain buttons is basically from Brain Gym. Lazy eights are also part of Brain Gym, and Brain Gym is a fantastic modality. In the brain buttons technique, I will show that at the end. They basically stimulate the carotid arteries, which supply fresh oxygenated blood to the brain. This technique upgrades the communication between body and brain, helps improve reading, writing, speaking, and the ability to focus, to follow directions. So let's look at the, one second, let's look at the memory and imagination. One more thing I want to say here is that the brain doesn't segregate real visual experiences, right, which we see with eyes open, and internal visual experiences, which are memory and imagination, into entirely separate processes or areas. Instead, there's a lot of overlap. The interconnectedness helps us make sense of the world, recognize patterns, predict outcomes, and stimulate possible scenarios. All this is crucial for our survival and day-to-day functioning. So the visual cortex isn't just a passive processor of incoming visual data. It's dynamically engaged when we remember visual events or construct visual scenarios in our mind's eye. Memory provides the raw material, the visual cortex then provides the canvas, and the imagination wields the brush to paint diverse mental images. I hope you like my copywriting. But here, what I want to say too, a lot of times I hear from people, I don't see anything when I close my eyes, it's all black. Or, some like Tori, actually, the Australian guy, he said he kind of saw everything behind his closed eyelids, like it was a big movie screen. That doesn't happen for me. So think more, when you have that experience, think more of in your mind's eye. It doesn't mean that you actually see the picture, with closed eyes. And I know some people can do that, but start with the mind. Like, can you remember something? That's really the key aspect. And the thing I want to show you now, which is so simple, we use that a lot in the Bates method, is to simple a dot or a period. And for some people, it's easier to do a white one on black. But basically, look at this dot and then close your eyes. And now in your mind's eye, do you remember this white dot? So maybe you're like, it's gone after a second. So then open your eyes again, look at it again, and then close them again. And we do it a lot of times with the black dot on white, because that's what text is, right? Actual written material is usually black on white. With screens nowadays, we have the ability to do it this way, which is actually more relaxing for the eyes. So if you can, I always recommend dark mode on all your devices, on the apps, any app that has dark mode, please do that. Less blue light and all that good stuff. But let's move on. So you have your eyes closed. You can, in your mind's eye, again, it doesn't mean the white dot is like floating in front of you, or it's like, projected onto your inner eyelids. Do you have it in your mind's eye? And then you can imagine now, you can make it really white. You can imagine the background to be super black. You can imagine the dot to be smaller. Maybe imagine it to be, bigger. Maybe you can imagine it to be like a pendulum, like swinging from side to side. Or it's kind of a, like the bass speaker, like where it's kind of coming closer and then it's moving away, like coming in and out, like getting bigger, smaller, kind of moving in and out. So this is where you can, the dot is so simple. That's why I like it. But again, we use this technique pretty much for almost all practices in our in the Bates method and my natural clear vision method. But this is a simple way you can practice it. We also go to the point where, can you imagine a black dot inside a black space? Can you imagine as if somebody drew a little black dot with a Sharpie in a black space? All of these techniques are really helpful to hone your clarity, actually your visual focusing skills. All right, let's lazy eights. So in my programs, I have a full video on this, but for now, I just want to show a picture and you get the download, the PDF with the description. But here I do them on paper. And really, like for this, you want to take some time, you want to make them big. And I'm, by the way, drawing up in the center, not down. It looks a little bit, I'm going down to the center in this picture, but I'm actually moving to the left. So you always want to go upwards in the center. And again, in the handout, I describe exactly, I always start with both eyes open. You start with your dominant hand and you do a bunch of these rounds. You follow the tip of the pen with your eyes, and it really relaxes. That movement is super relaxing. Then you use your non-dominant hand. I like different colors. And then you start with what you see here. You occlude one eye, you work with one eye at a time, both, again, right hand, or whatever, dominant hand, non-dominant hand, then the other eye, dominant hand, non-dominant hand. Then in the end, you use both hands on one pen, and then at the very end, you use a different pen for each hand and you cross them over in the center. So this is, again, take your time with this, make them nice and big, especially if you're nearsighted, you tend to make tiny ones, make them nice and big. And this is really helpful. Another way, this is also part of brain gym, is to do them in the air, where you just kind of draw it with your thumb. And there's two ways to do it with the air. You can either, like you see me here doing it, where you follow, your head is moving along, basically, looking at the thumb. Or if you want to stimulate your peripheral more, you can keep your head center and do the lazy 8s in the air, but you keep your gaze in the center, and you just move your thumb to the sides. That stimulates the peripheral vision a little bit more. But both versions are really helpful to do. And I actually like to teach it where I start with really small lazy 8s, and then they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then they get so big that you have to go down, you have to bend your knees as if you're almost touching the floor. I like to make them really big and then go back and make them small again. So anyway, quickly talking about the field divider. So remember this part, right? When we cross our eyes, our nasal vision is basically same side, right? What we see on the right, when we look at our eyes, our nose, it's hard to do that really, but what you see is the same side. But the temporal vision is crossing over, and this is where a visual field divider comes in. And obviously you only see one side on this one, but here I have a green color on the left, and I have a pink color on the right side. And if I were to cross my eyes again, then the left I would see the green, and the right I would see the pink. Now, if you look into the distance, the colors are flipped. So basically, you see a little gate with a little space. I will show that here. And when you look into the distance, you actually see the green on the right and the pink on the left, because remember, the vision is flipped when we look on the outer edges, so to speak. So sometimes when people don't get it, I have them move the eyes to the left. Okay, of course, I only see pink now. Move them to the right, I only see green. And then you go back and forth. Eventually in the center, they're like, oh, well, now I get it. I see the exact thing. So let me stop my screen share. And okay, here, I'm back here. So this is basically, this is just made from like a pair of glasses. It's those kind of where you pop out the lenses, and then it's a little putty here, and I put my little thing here. And so actually, I think this card is different than the one in the video. It's the other side around. But really helpful to do. This is basically something you can wear, especially if your binocular vision is, you can use this to wear it and notice the two colors. I did a whole video on using this thing. So we can link that in the YouTube underneath. There's a whole video of how you can use it. You can use it for the long swing. Really helps your eyes to stay focused versus doing this on this. If you don't want to build this whole thing, you can always hold a card. And here's a tip: if you have one eye that's more impaired or weaker, or I don't like the word weaker really, but let's say you have a cataract in one eye, or one eye's vision is not as strong, you can put black on the side of the eye that has better vision, and you can put a really bright neon color like yellow on the side of the eye that needs a little bit more support, or a little bit more, stimulation. And so you could technically also hold the card like this. And for some people, they have to make it bigger. So people ask me what exact size. It doesn't really matter. If, mine is about credit card size, but sometimes I had to make it almost letter size for people to get the idea. So you can play around with different sizes, different colors. Obviously, if you're colorblind, like red and green, you don't want to use those two colors, but you want some bright neon colors that are different. All right. So what was the next thing? Now I have to look at my slideshow again to remember what we wanted to talk about next. I think, let me just look very quick, remind myself what the next one was that we had before this. Oh yeah, so we had the lazy 8s. Again, there's a handout for that. And quick second, just looking here. So yeah, field divider nose cut is a great tool. I think a lot of people don't know about this. Oh yeah, one more thing I wanted to say about this. Some of you might know my friend, Irina Castle, the Overbound eyesight trainer. She came up with this wonderful tool for peripheral vision stimulation. It's a frame, and it snaps on different things for, blocking one eye or blocking both eyes. So she has different shields. Let me see, there's one for each eye separate. And she is coming out, and I think it's happening this fall. I don't know the exact date, but she's coming out with a nose cut holder. So you can basically use, once you get the system, you can use this, and it comes with a plastic, like a little proper way to attach the nose cut. So once she has this, she's going to come back and share this. For those of you that have this tool, we can also put a link in the YouTube show notes. I forgot to add that there. Then you will be able to purchase the little nose cut holder. And the nice thing, you can bend it all the way to the side. So one thing I forgot to say, sometimes, depending on your vision, you might also want to bend it, right? You want to not move it, like especially if you have amblyopia, sometimes not having it straight, but having it not bent toward the eye that needs more support is really helpful. So it works with this too, but it's a little bit more flimsy and can easily fall down. Okay, so alternate nostril breathing is basically a yogic technique that you start with, people use a ring finger or a middle finger, but you usually use one nostril. So you start by basically taking a deep breath in on one nostril on the left. Then you close your nose with both, and you hold your breath for whatever length you want, and then you exhale. I have a little stuffiness here to the right. And then you inhale. And then again, you hold your breath. And then you exhale. So some people like to do it to a certain count. But what I like to add in there is an imagination. So let's try this again. So as I'm inhaling through my left nostril, I'm imagining the air is drawn up, going to my right brain side. Then it's swishing to the left. And then it's coming out the right. So it makes this kind of loop. That's what I like to imagine when I'm doing this practice. So I can't really show this, but so inhale. And then goes up to the right side. Then I hold my breath, and the breath is moving to the left side of my brain. And then I'm releasing it to the right nostril. So yeah, there's a lot of YouTube videos on this. You can find videos on an alternate nostril breathing. I'm totally blanking on the Sanskrit name, but I'd like to add this idea that the breath is flowing in that kind of loopy pattern, really connecting both sides of the brain. And then let's do the brain gym brain buttons. So for those, you want to find, basically it's about an inch below your clavicle and about an inch away from your sternum. There's like 2 indentations. You can find them, and you basically, you use a thumb, and again, ring finger or middle finger, whatever works better for you. So you kind of hook them in there, and then the other hand gets put on your navel. So you put the other hand on your navel. And the basic technique is that you are just massaging. You can rub them in a circle. Sometimes I like to vibrate them, but you just kind of, again, you can rub them in a circle. So you do it that way. And this is the basic technique. So you're holding your navel with the other hand, and you rub these 2 points. And you can add, this is what really comes with the brain, the 2 sides of the brain. This stimulates the oxygen to the brain and helps with focusing. But now you can add more. You can add on another layer where you look slowly to the right, and then you slowly look to the left. And again, you keep your head center. So you're slowly moving to the right, to the left. And you do this for 30 seconds, up to a minute. And some people recommend there's a bazillion different versions. You can also switch the hands. I don't even think that's necessary, but if you want, you can then switch the hand, put the other one on the navel, and then continue. But if that's too much for you, you can even just close your eyes and just do this. Hold your belly, and then massage those 2 spots. And I have resources listed for the brain gym. It's fantastic. There's cross-crawling, so many great, the lazy eights. There's also imagine you being an X, kind of similar to the alternate nostril breathing, but so many great brain gym techniques really help you to focus better, to read better, to write better, to just feel more confident. They have something called positive points. So I'm not a brain gym teacher, but I just love brain gym, and they have lots of resources, and I listed them all underneath the YouTube. So let me see if there's any questions on YouTube. 1 second. Trying to look at the YouTube live here. Oh, thank you for all you do. Thank you so much. That's nice. So I don't see any questions on YouTube. If you have any questions and you're watching this later, you can always put them into the comments, and I will do my best to answer them. And I will make sure that we add all the other resources I just talked about to the YouTube channel. So thank you, YouTube. I'll see you next week. And Share this with as many friends that could benefit. I really appreciate the subscription. And again, the more, the better. We have amazing guests almost every week. We have guests, and sometimes, like today, I'm teaching my solo episode. Hope this was helpful. Hope you learned a little bit about the brain anatomy and the visual pathways and how fascinating our eyes are. And it's so much more than this, right? So much more than this.